Hi, warm greetings to you all. Welcome back to BION, the channel that shares knowledge on holistic self-development through great books. If you dare to divorce me, don't even think about seeing the child again. If you marry her, don't consider me your father anymore. If you leave me, I won't be able to live. If you can't work overtime with the team, I may have to reconsider your promotion. Do these sentences sound familiar to you? In reality, most of us have at some point fallen into or at least witnessed similar situations. What's striking is that these words usually come from the people closest to us, our spouse, parents, friends, or colleagues. They may only intend to do what they believe is best for you in their own way, yet they end up making you live in pain. Or perhaps they use the name of love as a tool to control your life. Susan Forward, a renowned psychotherapist and New York Times best-selling author, called this phenomenon emotional blackmail. Translated literally, it means blackmail through emotions. But this blackmail doesn't involve kidnapping loved ones for ransom. Instead, it uses emotions to turn your heart, fears, and sense of responsibility into the most subtle weapon to gain absolute submission from you. Because the people you care about most are also the ones who know your deepest vulnerabilities. The ones closest to you are the very people who can push you into endless emotional battles. This is the true nature of emotional manipulation. This week's book, Emotional Blackmail by Susan Forward, is a classic in the field of psychology. It helps you clearly recognize the signs of emotional blackmail, understand how it operates, and learn effective ways to respond. Doing so will allow you to restore self-trust, break the vicious cycle of manipulation and compliance, and ultimately escape the maze of toxic relationships. This is a book for anyone who feels lost, hurt, and trapped in their most intimate relationships, the very place that should have been a haven of peace for them. And now, let's dive into today's sharing session. So, how do we diagnose emotional manipulation in the form of kidnapping your weaknesses? First, I will use the term emotional manipulation instead of emotional blackmail to make it easier to understand. But we should keep in mind that emotional manipulation here refers to when the other person seizes your weakness, takes it hostage, and turns it into a condition that forces you to obey them. Typically, this type of emotional manipulation exists in the form of direct threats, which we can easily recognize right away. For example, if you leave me, don't expect to see the child again. Or if you don't support your younger brother, then don't call us your parents anymore. The manipulator's intention is clear, using consequences to coerce compliance. However, in most cases, it's much subtler. Hidden behind the harmonious surface of close relationships lies covert manipulation. Beautiful memories, initial care, and the labels of love or family make you vague and unable to realize the creeping control. Gradually, the other person crosses boundaries, pushing you into reluctant compromises under invisible pressure. Author Susan Forward summarized this phenomenon of hostage-taking emotional manipulation into 6 characteristic stages. To better understand how this process unfolds in real life, let's look at a specific example. Lan had been working non-stop all week, often staying late at the office. Sunday was her only day to completely rest. However, her husband, Dung, valued family activities greatly and always wanted the whole family to go out together on weekends. One day, exhausted, Lan gently told her husband, "This week, I'm really drained. Can we just stay home or take a short walk nearby?" The NG replied, "I know you're tired, but I'm just as tired as you." Going out is also a way to relax and rest. But Lan knew well that such outings would involve a whole chain of preparations, which her aching body simply could not handle. She tried to stand her ground. "I'm really tired. I just don't want to go anywhere." Dung began increasing the pressure. Instead of caring about Lan's feelings, he said, "We already promised the kids we'd go out. If you change your mind now, they'll be so disappointed." We can't be the kind of parents who break promises, and my parents, if they find out, they surely won't be pleased. Hearing this, Lan felt guilty. She told herself that her husband only wanted the best for the children, and that breaking a promise really wasn't right. Despite her exhaustion, she reluctantly agreed, but the trip brought her no joy or relaxation, only worsened her health. And this scenario didn't happen just once. Dung continued using the same reasoning to pressure Lan into family activities, regardless of her condition or need for rest. To outsiders, Lan and Dung's interactions might seem normal, even like signs of caring for family. But behind those seemingly logical and well-intentioned words was a sequential process of emotional manipulation unfolding in 6 stages identified by the author. Stage 1, the demand. In any relationship, it's common for one party to express a desire and ask the other to participate. But in Lan's case, the NG, desire for weekend outings was no longer a suggestion or idea. It had become an unspoken command, leaving no room for discussion or alternatives. Stage 2, resistance. When faced with an unreasonable demand, the other person has every right to say no, just as Lan did, because she was too tired. This resistance reflects the need for freedom and the defense of personal boundaries. It's a natural human instinct, but in reality, without clear awareness, such resistance is often weak. Stage 3, pressure. This quickly follows. The manipulator uses arguments that sound reasonable to persuade the other. For example, Dung said that he was also very tired, but still saw going out as a way for both of them to relax. On the surface, this shows empathy. But in reality, it is a way to dismiss Lan's personal feelings and force her to submit to his desire. Stage 4, threat. If pressure doesn't work, the manipulator escalates to threats. They use the other person's deep vulnerabilities as leverage. Dung knew Lan valued her image as a good mother and daughter-in-law, so he used moral pressure. Breaking a promise would disappoint the kids and displease the grandparents. These weren't direct threats, but they hit her guilt and fears, creating immense pressure. Stage 5, compliance. When guilt overwhelms reason, Lan gave in. Even though she knew the request was unreasonable and unfair, she reluctantly agreed. This consent didn't come from genuine willingness, but from emotional coercion. Repeated compliance like this accumulates, inevitably leading to conflict and resentment in the relationship. Stage 6, reset. Eventually, after the tension and struggle, the relationship seems to stabilize again. But this only resets the cycle. A new demand will be made, followed by resistance, pressure, threats, and reluctant compliance all over again. This is the manipulative cycle, and recognizing these behavioral tactics is the first step to breaking free. In reality, most people caught in this cycle are not even aware they are being emotionally manipulated. It's as if a fog blinds their eyes, leaving them struggling with the very person they love the most. To lift that fog, you need to understand the tactics, behaviors, and psychology of the manipulator. Typically, there are 4 common behavioral tactics of emotional manipulation. First, dichotomous thinking. This is a way of perceiving everything in black and white terms. Right or wrong, good or bad, loyal or unfaithful, leaving no space for a gray area. In the eyes of the manipulator, if you are not completely on their side, then you are against them. And if you don't do what they want, your love or loyalty will be questioned. For example, Lin's newlywed husband often complained whenever she went out with friends. If you really love me, you'll spend more time with me. A married woman going out on her own all the time? What people think. At first, Lin tried to balance her relationships, but over time she began to feel guilty every time she left the house. Eventually, she declined all invitations out of fear of being labeled unfaithful. This is a textbook case of black and white thinking. Either the wife devotes herself completely to her husband, or she is untrustworthy. There is no room for compromise, no acknowledgement of her personal needs. This way of thinking doesn't rest on logic, but on emotional control. It corners the victim so that every act of resistance is labeled as wrong. Once trapped in this black and white mindset, victims often don't dare to say no, for fear of being seen as the bad one. But the truth is, loving someone does not mean losing your own world. A healthy relationship always makes space for individuality, where both people can be themselves while respecting each other's differences. The second common tactic is in any relationship, disagreements are normal, but emotional manipulators turn such differences into signs of psychological issues. They refuse to accept the other person's unique needs or perspectives, instead linking them to past traumas, fear of commitment, or some hidden disorder. For example, NGA and XNG were dating. NG constantly wanted to be around NG. But one evening, NGA asked for some private time to herself. Instead of respecting her wish, NG reacted. People in love always want to be together, why don't you? Is it because you were hurt or betrayed before? Maybe you should get therapy. At first, NGA brushed it off, knowing she had no such trauma. But over time she began to doubt herself. Was she really cold, broken, and incapable of love? This is manipulation through pathologizing. Emotions turning a natural reaction into a supposed problem, so the victim loses confidence and eventually complies with every demand, no longer able to resist. The third tactic manipulators use is forming alliances. When their arguments aren't strong enough, they enlist others to add pressure. Take the case of Ken, a man in his 30s. His wife kept insisting they'd buy a house near her parents. When Ken disagreed, instead of working it out together, she invited her mother over. Within minutes, the mother-in-law scolded. What kind of son-in-law doesn't think about filial duty? Other men pamper their wives, yet you complain at the slightest request. Suddenly, Ken felt isolated in his own home. No matter what he said, he was painted as careless and irresponsible. His feelings were drowned out by the combined voices of his wife, his mother-in-law, and the judgmental stares. When truth gets overshadowed by bias and group pressure, the victim easily loses their voice and sense of self. Lastly, manipulators love using negative comparisons. Almost all of us have, at some point, been compared to friends, siblings, co-workers, or some idealized figure. Though such comparisons may seem harmless, repeated often enough, they erode self, leaving the person feeling never good enough. For example, Thursday's mother constantly told her, "Look at Mrs. H's son, he just got a job and already bought his parents a fridge. And you, always complaining you don't have money." Hearing such words over and over, Thursday began to feel unfilial, useless, and pressured to work twice as hard just to keep up. Comparison is one of the most insidious forms of emotional manipulation. The manipulator doesn't need harsh words, just pointing to someone else and asking, "Why can't you be like them?" is enough to plant seeds of guilt and inadequacy. So why do we suffer and feel powerless in the face of such demands? And what kinds of people are most vulnerable to emotional manipulation? Before we dive into how to respond, let's pause and reflect on a crucial question. When someone is emotionally manipulated, who truly bears the responsibility? Is it fair to place all the blame solely on the manipulators? The answer isn't that simple. In reality, a portion of the responsibility also lies with the person being manipulated. This is because emotional manipulation has never been a one-sided act. The manipulator's power is fundamentally tied to the reactions of the person they are targeting. In other words, your own responses and mindset partly create and sustain the very manipulation you are experiencing. Now, this doesn't mean that victims should be blamed for their suffering. Rather, it highlights the profound importance of in suffocating relationships, We may have felt the urge to shout, but perhaps our voice wasn't loud enough. Initially, failing to recognize manipulation isn't your fault, especially in close relationships where we naturally let our guard down. When we are in love, we often interpret our partner's requests as signs of care and affection. But if those demands escalate, becoming unreasonable and harsh, and yet we choose to remain silent, compliant, or yielding, that is where our own mistake begins. Many of us harbor the fantasy that our compliance will bring peace or earn us the love we crave from the other person. But does it truly work? The answer is a resounding no. Once someone discovers that you will bend to their every will, they realize they have found a highly effective method of control. They will keep pushing your boundaries, testing your limits, and once they grasp your deepest weaknesses, it becomes incredibly difficult for them to release the hostages that grant them absolute power over you. So, what are these vulnerabilities they so expertly seize upon? The most powerful ones are fear, responsibility, and guilt. Those closest to you always know what you fear most. It could be the fear of loss, the fear of abandonment, or the fear of no longer being loved. It might be the fear of losing the familiar comforts of your life, the fear of tarnishing the carefully constructed image of a happy family, the fear of losing your job, or the fear of seeing all the years of effort you've invested go to waste. Then there's the fear of being judged as irresponsible. Our society often glorifies the concept of responsibility. From a young age, we are taught to be responsible for our parents, our families, our children, and the collective. This deep-seated conditioning is precisely why responsibility and guilt so often go hand in hand. When you are accused of being irresponsible, a wave of guilt can make you believe that you are the root cause of every problem and misfortune. This guilt then compels you to accept self-sacrifice as a way to make amends even when a part of you knows you are on the wrong path, with the wrong person, or in the wrong situation. This toxic blend of fear, responsibility, and guilt creates a powerful mental vortex that traps you in a cycle of self-blame, inner torment, and the gradual erosion of your true self. But no matter how deep your fear runs, never forget this fundamental truth. If you are in pain, you must speak up. It is time to stop blaming yourself. You need to give a voice to that inner part of you that longs for genuine love and care. Say it out loud. I am in pain. I am uncomfortable with these demands and these labels that are being forced upon me. You must face your fears honestly and ask yourself, am I living in a way that makes me vulnerable to manipulation? The author of the book, When You Restuck in a Relationship, identifies for personality types who are especially prone to falling into the trap of emotional manipulation. First is the approval seeker. Driven by a fear of criticism or being seen as inadequate, this person constantly seeks praise and validation from others. This dependency forces them to live according to others' judgments and renders them incapable of saying no. Next is the peacekeeper. To avoid conflict and confrontation at all costs, this person chooses silence and endurance to preserve a sense of harmony. However, this is merely a false peace, one that ultimately leads to them being overshadowed and silently accumulating resentment. Then there is the overly responsible. This individual believes they must shoulder every burden, even those that are not theirs to bear. Their tendency to take on too much makes them easy targets for exploitation and inevitably leads to severe emotional exhaustion. Finally, we have the lacking self-confidence. They place far more trust in others' opinions than in their own intuition. They are constantly questioning themselves with thoughts like, am I wrong? Am I not good enough? Over time, they lose touch with their inner voice and allow others to dictate the course of their life. Therefore, developing a keen awareness of your own psychological patterns and behaviors is absolutely essential. It is time to break free from this destructive cycle. It is time to save yourself. So then how exactly can we begin to respond to emotional manipulation? So, How should we respond to emotional manipulation? When you finally recognize that you're being emotionally manipulated and understand the deep-seated reasons for your own vulnerability, your first instinct might be to summon all your courage and walk away decisively. But is that truly the most effective solution? So, how should we respond to emotional manipulation? When you finally recognize that you are being emotionally manipulated and understand the deep-seated reasons for your own vulnerability, your first instinct might be to summon all your courage and walk away decisively. But is that truly the most effective solution? Many people instinctively think of leaving, of cutting all ties, but this approach is not what the experts recommend as the primary course of action. You may succeed in creating physical distance from the manipulator, but if you have not yet closed the emotional and psychological distance within your own soul, then leaving is merely a temporary escape, a fleeting reprieve from the immediate pressure. If you continue to feel weak, harbor feelings of worthlessness, live your life according to the expectations of others, or carry a pervasive fear about future relationships, then ending the current one is simply an act born of disappointment, fueled by anger, or intended as a form of punishment toward the manipulator. However, using punishment has never been, and will never be, a sustainable path toward achieving inner peace and genuine healing. Therefore, to truly and effectively respond to emotional manipulation, it is not enough to understand only your own psychology. You must also endeavor to understand the psychology of the manipulator. Behind the often confusing and hurtful behaviors of manipulators, there frequently lies a profound fear of losing control and a deeply ingrained tendency to resort to punishment. They perceive relationships not as a partnership, but as a competitive game of winning or losing. In their minds, they must win at all costs, and to ensure victory, they must become rigid, unyielding, and controlling. They only feel a sense of value or self-worth when others completely and utterly comply with their demands. If you fail to follow their wishes, the overwhelming sense of losing control drives them to punish you. This punishment can manifest in various ways, sometimes by punishing you directly through threats of separation or abandonment, and other times by punishing themselves. This is precisely why many manipulators engage in self-harm, make dramatic threats about their well-being, or even contemplate suicide when they feel they cannot get their way. It is a desperate, albeit destructive attempt to regain the control they feel is slipping away. On the surface, manipulators may project an image of being strong, confident, and domineering. They can seem unshakable and powerful. However, as the ancient Stoic philosophers wisely observed, those who appear strongest on the outside are often the weakest and most fragile on the inside. From this compassionate perspective, manipulators are, in fact, deeply wounded and pitiable individuals. The vast majority of them are essentially children trapped in adult bodies, carrying the unhealed scars and traumas from their early life experiences. There is a common saying that asks, what does it truly mean to pass life's lessons in love and relationships? True maturity earned after navigating the complexities of a relationship is not demonstrated by the ease with which one can end it, but by the courage to face yourself and to face the other person with honesty and empathy. Sometimes, the best and most healing solution is to approach the difficult situation with a spirit of understanding, compassion, and even forgiveness. This is not to say there is a single, rigid method that applies to every case, because every situation and every relationship is unique, with its own history and dynamics. However, there are several common strategies that you can consider and adapt when dealing with manipulative behavior. Let's explore 4 of them. First, let go of defensive communication. Imagine a scenario where a manipulator accuses you of being selfish. If your immediate reply is, "No, you're the selfish one," you have fallen into the trap of defensive communication. Such reactive exchanges do little more than escalate emotions, making the conversation increasingly tense and unproductive. The key is to consciously step out of these emotional traps, regain your composure, and restore a sense of clarity to the interaction. Instead of engaging in a pointless argument, you might try a different approach. You could say something like, "I'm sorry that what I did upset you. I can understand why you might feel that way. Let's sit down and talk about this calmly." Or you could try, "You're right. Maybe part of this is my fault. Let's try to work it out together." This method of dropping your defensiveness is not about admitting fault where there is none. Rather, it is a strategic tool to disarm the tension and bring a sense of rationality back into the conversation, creating a space where a real solution can be found. Second, turn the manipulator into an ally. When you feel cornered, stuck, and powerless, one of the most effective ways to break the deadlock is to invite the other person to solve the problem with you. Instead of resisting their pressure or pushing back against their demands, you can skillfully redirect the conversation by asking for their help, seeking their advice, or requesting their cooperation. This shifts the dynamic from a confrontation to a collaboration. For example, you might ask questions such as, "Can you help me understand why this is so important to you right now? Or could you tell me more about why you feel so upset or angry about this particular issue?" You could also ask, "What do you think we should do to solve this problem together?" By framing it as a joint effort, you are no longer adversaries. You can also spark their curiosity by saying something like, "I wonder if you could help me think of a creative solution here." When curiosity and imagination are engaged, the overall mood of the interaction becomes lighter and more positive, making open and honest dialogue much easier. People generally dislike being blamed or accused, but they are often surprisingly willing to help when they are invited sincerely and respectfully. Involving them in the process of finding a solution makes them feel valued and, as a result, far more likely to be cooperative. Third, learn to negotiate conditions. When you are faced with selfish or unreasonable demands, it is natural to feel anger, hurt, and pain, but it is crucial to remember this fundamental truth. Others will only change when you are willing to change your response to them. This doesn't mean you have to submit completely to their will. It means being a bit softer in your approach while still holding firm to your own needs and boundaries. For instance, consider a situation where a boss asks an employee to cancel a long-planned family vacation at the last minute. Instead of reacting with anger or passive-aggressively complying, the employee could negotiate. They might say, "I understand your expectations, and I want you to know that I truly value this job and my role here. However, I have already made a firm promise to my family for this vacation. I might be able to shorten the trip by a couple of days, but I would really appreciate it if next time I could be informed a bit earlier so I can prepare better and avoid this kind of conflict." This type of negotiation establishes clear boundaries and demonstrates self-respect, while also acknowledging the other person's perspective and showing a willingness to find a middle ground. It is an act of respecting your own feelings without disrespecting the relationship. Fourth, use humor. Nothing builds closeness and diffuses tension faster than shared laughter. Humor is a powerful and often underutilized bond in any relationship. Let's take a common household example. A husband consistently watches soccer every evening, avoiding his share of the housework. When his wife gently reminds him of the chores, he replies with a classic manipulative line, "I work hard all day to support this house. Can't I just have a little time to rest when I get home? Do you want me to work myself to death before you're satisfied?" This statement is a textbook case of emotional manipulation, designed to turn a shared responsibility into a source of guilt for his wife. Instead of getting drawn into an argument about fairness and workloads, the wife could try a humorous approach. She could cheerfully present him with a handmade paper trophy, on which she has written "World Champion of Sitting Still," and announce in a mock serious, sportscaster-like tone, "Congratulations on setting a new world record, 2 straight hours of watching soccer without moving a single muscle. The audience was truly impressed by your dedication." The absurdity and lightheartedness of the moment would likely make them both laugh. The husband, feeling embarrassed but not personally attacked, might then get up, do the dishes, and perhaps even invite his wife for a walk. In this instance, humor works as a gentle mirror, reflecting the reality of the situation without confrontation or hurt. It relieves the built-up tension and creates a natural, easy opening for positive change. These, then, are just some of the powerful and compassionate ways you can begin to respond to emotional manipulation. And finally, for those who still feel like they are being held as hostages. In such relationships, remember that the first step is always reclaiming your own power, not by fighting, but by understanding. When you truly love someone, your happiness and sorrow are no longer just your own. You willingly place a part of your life in another person's hands, believing they will treasure it. However, if this trust is betrayed, that love can turn into a cage. The affection you once cherished becomes a tool for control, and your vulnerability is used against you. You find yourself trapped in a cycle of hope and despair, constantly making excuses for the person who is hurting you, blurring the line between care and control. This book offers a clear guide to help you identify the subtle signs of emotional abuse. It provides the tools to understand the manipulative tactics being used against you and to reflect on the psychological patterns that keep you feeling stuck. By understanding both your own behavior and that of the other person, you can begin the journey of reclaiming your life, finding your way back to a place of inner clarity, strength, and self-worth. You must remember that you are inherently worthy of a love that is safe and respectful. You do not need to endure pain or surrender your autonomy to be loved. True love begins with loving yourself by being honest about your needs and boundaries. When you are rooted in self-love and recognize your own completeness, you release the fear of abandonment and the desperate need for external approval. At that point, no one can exploit your insecurities to manipulate or control you. Breaking free from emotional manipulation isn't always about a dramatic confrontation or an abrupt ending. The most crucial step is learning to love another person without losing yourself in the process. It's about maintaining your emotional clarity and rational thinking. It's about letting go of the fear of being alone and the obsessive craving for their validation. It's about finding the strength to choose your own well-being. I hope today's message helps you begin to untangle the emotional knots that have been holding you back. And my deepest wish for you is this: may you find profound peace as you embark on the journey back to your true self. Thank you for listening. If you found this video meaningful, please share it with anyone who might need to hear this message. Don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you don't miss our new videos each week. Once again, thank you and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.